Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Welcome to the first session of the UN Trade Forum 2021. I am Teresa Moreira, one of the officers in charge of the Division on International Trade and Commodities, the moderator of this session, and I'm very pleased to be here today. I would like to start sharing some housekeeping rules before we start our discussion. On interpretation, please select the language, English, French, or Spanish with the right-hand side button at the bottom of the screen. Using the Q&A function, you can send questions to the panelists. The session starts with presentations by the panelists, which will be followed by a Q&A session. So I would like now to start my introductory remarks. A new green recovery has become a truly global need within the context of the climate crisis and of the COVID-19 pandemic. Climate change and the response policies aimed at mitigating its impact will have different and complex effects on world markets and trade, affecting productivity, transportation costs, competitiveness, sectoral comparative advantages, and trade policies. Each country will have a unique trade climate resilience pathway. Developed and developing countries must work together to achieve this goal, but it is necessary to recognize countries' different levels of development and reactive capacity, as they have varied levels of vulnerability to climate change. Adaptation measures, according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, needs to be applied here. Trade plays a very important role towards the green recovery, as it can allow a free flow of environmental goods and services and new technologies to help countries reduce their gas emissions. Green policies instruments such as sustainability standards and carbon measures can strongly encourage this adaptation, which should encompass access to funds, as we heard this morning from our high-level panel discussion. UNCTAD's recent research on the importance of climate adaptation and trade, the Trade and Environment Review 2021, and the Climate Change, Green Recovery and Trade Analysis paper, also from this year, focusing on a coherent response to climate and the COVID-19 crisis, are timely references. Only through effective cooperation, the necessary financial and technology transfers, as well as the creation of capacities, can this challenge be faced. This eminent panel will address how trade policies and rules can better support green development and how the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and the need for trade climate readiness can be mainstream within the trade system. It will also address how can UNCTAD as a trade agency contribute to the global agenda in cooperation with other international and regional organizations and other relevant partners, bearing in mind the upcoming UNCTAD 15 Ministerial Conference in October, the COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, and the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference 12 later this year. I would like now to introduce our distinguished speakers according to the sequence of their intervention. The first intervention will be by His Excellency Minister Augusto Santos Silva, Minister of State and for Foreign Affairs of Portugal, who will speak to us through a video address. Afterwards, we have the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, QC, Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat. Next, His Excellency Ms. Chad Blackman, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Barbados to the United Nations Office and WTO, and former World Trade Organization Committee on Trade and Environment Chair. Followed by Minister Reina Sotillo, Member of the Board of the Green Climate Fund and Minister Plenipotentiary, Directorate of Environmental Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Relations, International Trade and Worship, Argentina. Next, Mr. Sonam P. Wangdi, Chair of the Least Developed Countries LDC Group on Climate Change and Secretary of the National Environment Commission, Kingdom of Bhutan. And last but not least, Ms. Pamela Coke-Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. So we will start with a video by Minister Augusto Santos Silva, because Portugal is currently holding the presidency of the European Union Council, whose priorities include Green Europe, promoting the EU as a leader in climate action, and Global Europe, promoting a Europe that is open to the world.
Dear participants, I am very pleased to join you in this panel. In the aftermath of COVID-19, ambitious decisions and action in the fight against climate change, pollution, and the loss of biodiversity are more than ever a priority. The European Union and its member states are doing their part. As the presidency of the Council of the European Union, Portugal was pleased to lead the negotiation and to reach a political agreement on the European climate law. This law is a regulation that sets binding targets for all member states. This is the cornerstone of a legal framework that we will continue to build with a view Dear participants, I am very pleased to join you in this panel. In the aftermath of COVID-19, ambitious decisions and action in the fight against climate change, pollution, and the loss of biodiversity are more than ever a priority. The European Union and its member states are doing their part. As the presidency of the Council of the European Union, Portugal was pleased to lead the negotiation and to reach a political agreement on the European climate. Binding targets for all member states. This is the cornerstone of a legal framework that we will continue to build with a view to implement the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is the roadmap towards a circular and climate-neutral economy that is resilient, competitive, and safe, where economic growth is decoupled from resource use and which takes into consideration the different starting points and specificities of the member states. This process is not going to be easy. High levels of ambition imply a set of demanding challenges, namely the need to demonstrate that the transition will be fair, leaving no one behind. That's why the Portuguese presidency paid attention to the social pillar of the transition, and the Prime Minister, António Costa, hosted an European Union Social Summit in Porto on May, in which the European social partners, the European Parliament and European Commission signed the Porto Social Commitment. Leaving no one behind also means adopting tailor-made measures to promote gender equality. Gender equality is a key element to achieve sustainable development. International free trade and investment are drivers of growth, employment, and wealth worldwide. The post-COVID reality has shown the need for a trade policy that is adequate to new reality. The revision of our trade policy in Europe is based on the deep connection between trade and other related areas such as industrial policy, sustainable development, and digital transition. Openness of markets remains the basis of European approach, but it should encompass elements of these and other policies. Environmental sustainability is a top priority and the core objective of the European Green Deal that the revised trade policy will follow. Sustainable development is a core issue in EU's trade policy and EU's trade agreements. All new generation free trade agreements include a chapter on sustainable development. This chapter includes environment and social elements and is key to foster high standards in trade, including circular economy. It is rewarding to register a growing commitment from our trade partners regarding this approach, whether concerning labor laws or environment. Although many countries have committed or are considering achieving a long-term objective of carbon neutrality, differences in climate ambition in short and medium terms are still significant. To tackle this and other challenges, the European Commission will present on July the first part of the Fit for 55 package to the Council and European Parliament's negotiation and decision. This package includes a proposal to enable the implementation of a carbon border adjustment mechanism at European level by 2023. And let me refer to this carbon border adjustment mechanism. The World Trade Organization is one of the main fora where the EU is called to strive for a stronger interlinkage between trade policy and sustainable development. To be fair and legitimate, the carbon border adjustment mechanism will need to be designed in full compliance with the rules of the WTO and consistent with the multilateral climate framework and global development issues. To be effective, the implementation of the carbon border adjustment mechanism will need to be carried out in an inclusive and transparent manner, and we will remain alert to the impact it may have on our trade partners, aiming at reaching the best possible alignment. As an example of our efforts to achieve a green economy, Portugal hosted in Lisbon last April the high-level EU-Africa Green Investment Forum. It was an unprecedented exercise of true dialogue and engagement between Europe and Africa on climate change, the green transition, and our quest for greener and more sustainable investment and development. We got one clear message. Africans are concerned with climate change as we are in Europe, and rightly so. The 4 countries worst affected by climate change are in the African continent. So we all share the urgent need to adapt our societies, our economies, our business to the impending consequences of climate change. Financing global action is both crucial and instrumental to support developing countries, especially the most vulnerable, to increase global ambition in the implementation of the Paris Agreement and to ensure the transition to climate neutral and resilient economies. Recently, the European Union underlined the relevance of mobilizing both the public and private sectors and targeting investments with where the needs are greatest, notably the least developed countries and countries in situation of fragility or affected by conflict, as well as in other regions severely affected by the COVID pandemic. It is not possible to address climate change and inclusive recovery without highlighting the nexus between climate and oceans and the high potential of the blue economy. And that is my final point. The ocean absorbs more than 90% of excess atmospheric heat. It is an important carbon sink, and simultaneously, ocean is a source of emissions through the ocean-based economic sectors. Portugal and Kenya are organizing the second United Nations Ocean Conference in June 2022, which will be held in Lisbon. We expect it to be a truly impactful and action-oriented event, and with a strong political compromise towards the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean. To conclude, let me stress that a better coherence between policies is of paramount importance to achieve sustainable and development goals and relieve civil society concerns. In this sense, closer cooperation between international organizations such as WTO, UNCTAD, OECD and others, many others, is key to improve our contribution towards a green and inclusive recovery, including in trade context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to apologize on behalf of the organization as we were unable to show the video of Minister Santos Silva. In any case, his remarks will be later circulated, uploaded in our webpage. But without any further ado, I would like to now hand over the floor to the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat. Dear Secretary General, considering the impact of climate change in the Commonwealth countries, and in order to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal 12 on climate action, concretely, what are the priorities and deliverables in climate action and green recovery on the road to UNCTAD 15 and the WTO 12 Ministerial Conference? And I will have a follow-up question, which I share immediately. How can UNCTAD, together with the Commonwealth Secretariat, better assist developing countries to face this challenge? You have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for those two questions. Excellencies, distinguished participants. So let me start by thanking the Acting Secretary General of UNCTAD, Isabel Durand, for the invitation to participate in this second UN Trade Forum. As we look around, there is no doubt that the world has changed dramatically since the inaugural UN Trade Forum in Geneva in September 2019. Another thing is clear. Our post-COVID recovery efforts should not revert to business as usual practices. We must use this moment to strategize, re-engineer the plan towards objectives that are truly sustainable. A key message of this trade forum, and shared by the Commonwealth, is that trade offers positive solutions to manage the pandemic and will be an essential tool for economic recovery and building back better. As some economies start to recover, the climate crisis remains of great concern, with time rapidly diminishing for restorative action. Ahead of COP26 in November, countries are expected to submit revised nationally determined contributions with more ambitious targets to ensure the rise in global average temperature is kept below 1.5 Celsius. The initial NDC synthesis report shows that the national climate plans submitted so far do not put us on the path to meeting the Paris Agreement goals, and there is still an opportunity to reverse this trend but we need to act fast, including using UNCTAD 15 to garner momentum. UNCTAD 15, MC12, and COP26 are historic opportunities for us to take stock and translate the pandemic's lessons into ambitious actions. This requires urgent decisions to address the increased risk and challenges of climate change, natural disasters, environmental sustainability, and biodiversity loss, and to consider what role trade policy can play. For example, we all know that fish stocks are being depleted at unsustainable rates, affecting economic growth, food security, and livelihoods in many coastal countries, especially small states and small island developing states. A negotiated agreement on ending harmful fisheries subsidies is long overdue and should hopefully be adopted at MC12. But beyond MC12, and WTO members could consider enhancing cooperation on trade in environment, goods and services, enabling sustainable energy transition and promoting investment in environmentally friendly technologies. We need to tackle plastics pollution through more circular and sustainable plastics trade, particularly to find solutions that work for small island developing states and least developed countries. And so I am encouraged by the proactive initiative of some WTO members to launch a trade and environmental sustainability dialogue ahead of MC12. Digitalization and new digital technologies can play a pivotal role in contributing to the development of green, climate resilient economies, yet persistent digital divides threaten to widen inequalities within and between countries. Trade policy should help close this divide, build digital trade capacity, and increase digital engagement. Aid for trade can make a major contribution, particularly through a newly invigorated Aid for Digital Trade initiative. And to come to your second question, Commonwealth Secretariat and UNCTAD already enjoy a strong relationship backed by a history of fruitful collaboration, which can be harnessed to tackle these issues. And we have an existing MOU, which provides a ready platform for our two organizations to deepen our partnership. Our Commonwealth Blue Charter, Connectivity Agenda, Sustainable Energy Transition Agenda, and Trade Policy Work Program, supporting small states, small island developing states, least developed countries, and those graduating from this category, align strongly with and complement, I believe, UNCTAD's work. So looking ahead, we can provide expert analysis, policy advice, and technical assistance to enhance the effectiveness of member countries' policies to fight climate change, harness momentum for collective action, and further raise awareness of trade, environmental, and climate issues. And through our joint convening power, we can help to promote policy coordination across countries and advocate for enhanced measures and greater support to increase the resilience of climate vulnerable countries in the face of a changing climate and increased frequency of natural disasters. We can work together to promote transparency and information sharing about good practices on greener trade, identifying areas of future work and capacity building needs, particularly for least developed countries. A significant amount of ongoing work is helping to access countries' readiness to engage in the digital economy and benefit from digital trade. So both UNCTAD and the Commonwealth Secretariat are heavily involved in efforts to support our members to participate in a global economy that is increasingly digitalized. And we need a similar work program to gauge and assess countries' climate readiness and to understand what support they need to embrace and champion the green trade agenda. And this could cover a range of issues, such as the merits of carbon taxes and their implications for exporters and importers, or the benefits and challenges associated with the border carbon adjustment mechanisms being proposed by several developed countries, about which we've heard today. And many of these issues, challenges and opportunities are analysed and addressed in our forthcoming 2021 Commonwealth Trade Review, which examines 10 pathways to trade recovery beyond the pandemic. And I really look forward to inviting UNCTAD to join us for the report's formal launch in mid-July. There's masses that we can do together to be the difference that we need to make. And thank you.
Very much, Secretary General, for, well, first of all, for suggesting so many interesting and feasible actions in the very near future, highlighting the cooperation, of course, with WTO, with a number of member states, as you mentioned, but above all, for mentioning the partnership, the close and long partnership between the Commonwealth Secretariat and UNCTAD. Thank you very much. I would now like to hand the floor to His Excellency Mr. Chad Blackman, Ambassador of Barbados to the United Nations Office and WTO, asking Ambassador Blackman, has taking into consideration your experience, sir, as former the World Trade Organization Chair of the Committee on Trade and Environment, what can the WTO do to advance developing countries' interests in green recovery, and how can UNCTAD better assist developing countries to face this challenge? If you allow me, also highlighting that Barbados, as the host of UNCTAD 15, of course, plays a major role as far as the UNCTAD Secretariat in the upcoming months. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, let me say thank you to the organizers for putting together such a very important panel and discussion, and also for inviting me to speak to you. Now, I would like to preface my presentation by agreeing wholeheartedly with the premise that the pandemic has revealed deep-seated vulnerabilities across the world. Even before the health and economic crisis that we're now seeing, countries had been dealing with how to address the climate crisis, environmental emergencies, and also the attainment of environmental, economic, and social sustainability through the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, when we look at the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, for example, they'd mobilize countries to shift to a green development path. It would therefore reason that if recovery from the pandemic is going to be future-proof and suitable for the times, then such recovery must be green. Trade, of course, is an important driver of development, and a critical element of ensuring green recovery is necessary for the development of a new type of trade policy, which, amongst other things, includes the mainstreaming of environmental and climate objectives. Now, both the WTO and UNCTAD will therefore have a very critical role to play in terms of advancing developing country interests in green recovery, as well as to assist developing countries to face the challenges ahead. In the context of the WTO, there are a number of discussions that are ongoing relative to the nexus between trade and the environment, and also climate change in particular. These are taking place within the organization's Committee on Trade and Environment, as well as the plurilateral discussions. Now, with regards to the latter, firstly, the informal dialogue on plastics, pollution, and environmentally sustainable plastics trade is taking place. Secondly, structured discussions on trade and environmental sustainability. The discussions have focused on the liberalization of environmental goods and services, also fossil fuel subsidy reform, trade-related climate measures, including carbon border adjustment mechanisms and greening trade, with a focus on the circular economy and priorities for developing countries. Now, these initiatives seem to vary in terms of their outlook for further work in the organization vis-a-vis the WTO. For example, the creation of trade rules as opposed to transparency and identifying technical assistance and capacity building instruments in favor of developing countries. Now, over the weekend, for example, the G7 committed to making climate an integral part of WTO reform agenda, including by advancing negotiations on the plurilateral agreements to phase out tariffs on environmental goods, revising existing agreements to encourage decarbonization and supply chain resilience, including revising rules on incentives and subsidies. Now, although we have already started to see the emergence of revised priorities for developing countries, which focus on green recovery, mainstream developing countries have not been sold on the development of new rules on these areas within the organization. In other initiatives in the WTO, an increasing number of developing countries are registered to have signed on to these joint initiatives. These are still calls from developed countries for more inputs from developing countries and LDCs in determining their interests and also how development could be incorporated in a final outcome in the respective areas. In the WTO, again, there's also the need for a serious conversation on green aid for trade, both within the context of the CTE, as well as the CTD, the Committee on Trade and Development. Now, the OECD estimates that the green recovery measures amount to 2%, I repeat, 2% of the $14 billion total COVID-19 rescue and recovery spending combined. They also estimate that significant funds are still allocated to measures which likely are having negative impacts on the environment. It is noted that not many developing countries were able to afford pandemic rescue and recovery packages. These figures are therefore likely to be in relation to efforts of OECD member countries. There is a recognition that modern regimes that are climate and pandemic resilient will also require countries to mainstream environmental objectives into trade policies, develop appropriate trade policy tools, and modernize their legislative and regulatory regimes. We ought to therefore be very mindful that even though we are speaking about the WTO and not the climate negotiations of the UNFCCC, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities should therefore be core to the discourse. Financial resources and technical assistance and capacity building should also be granted in line with this principle, particularly given that those that have contributed least to the current climate crisis and environmental emergency continue to be disproportionately impacted by its effects. In considering green aid for trade, we also ought to ensure that we do not intentionally or unintentionally marginalize these developing countries purely on the basis of utilizing per capita income criteria. Now, over the years, the analysis has shown that per capita income criteria alone doesn't adequately take into account the development challenges faced by small and developing states. Yet, and a big yet, a number of these countries are unable to access concessional financing or aid for trade programs. I do not think that there's an opportunity for developing countries to develop their own proposals outlining issues of interest to them for elaboration, discussion, and outcomes in the WTO. UNCTAD, through its Division on International Trade and Commodities, seeks, of course, to build consensus, strengthen capacity, and to promote partnerships for trade policy, trade negotiations, trade in goods and services, and manage issues arising at the intersection of trade, the environment, and climate change. Now, let me pause here to thank the division for extending, as I said before, the invitation for us to participate in putting this all together. UNCTAD, therefore, is prime in assisting developing countries in achieving their green recovery objectives. Firstly, there is scope to revitalize the work on trade negotiations and also commercial diplomacy, and the branch within UNCTAD to treat to assisting developing countries in elaborating their negotiation positions in the WTO to build the knowledge gap and to fill the gap, that exists between developed countries and developing countries on a wide range of issues. For example, the whole issue of decarbonization, carbon pricing, and carbon border adjustment mechanisms. It is also envisioned that one of the core pillars of UNCTAD's future work, will be based on transforming to a more sustainable and resilient economy. This would allow for UNCTAD to look at issues related to climate change and the environment in a way that it has never looked at before, whilst of course maintaining its mandate, as well as working with other relevant international organizations in doing so. Now, UNCTAD additionally can assist developing countries with mainstreaming climate and environment objectives and ambitions into trade policies. This can assist members with taking advantage that would otherwise be missed opportunities across all sectors. The aim here would be to propel sustainability and transformation in strategic sectors, for example, agriculture and waste management. And finally, members in UNCTAD can use the organization's consensus building pillar, not only to enhance dialogue, but also to arrive at a bold set of conclusions and resolutions on green recovery and other aspects of the nexus between trade, climate, and the environment that could redound to meaningful contributions on the ground across the world in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Well, first of all, for highlighting how much the UNCTAD and concretely the division can contribute to the green and inclusive economic recovery. Well, we take good note, and we expect to, as you know, to follow up with the outcome of this second edition of the UN Trade Forum to UNCTAD 15. So we will be working closely with your country also on the preparation of future discussions. Thank you very much. I would now like to hand the floor to Ms. Reina Sotillo, member of the board of the Green Climate Fund and Minister Plenipotentiary from the Directorate of Environmental Affairs of Argentina, asking her, as a member of the board of the Green Climate Fund, Minister, how can the Green Climate Fund support developing countries climate-proof their trade? And how can UNCTAD also better assist developing countries to face this challenge, if possible, in cooperation or in coordination with the Green Climate Fund agenda? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Teresa Moreira. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I thank especially for inviting me to this second World Trade Forum of enormous importance due to the current situation where the impact of global warming and the effects of climate change is added to the most severe pandemic that we know. I have something positive for sharing with you this morning. 8 months ago, I started to cooperate with a community of traders, originary people from the Puna of Argentina, near Bolivia. The results of a small push towards sustainable trade founded my conviction that the inflection from the crisis to the environmentally sustainable progress requires concentrate our efforts on the trade based on sustainable production in order to ensure a healthy life for Latin American countries and for all the world. It was with the small grants program. It was a small amount of money, 18,600. And the transformation was very important. They substitute abundant firewoods and also fossil fuels for sustainable ones and increase production of natural foods. I have to speak first of all that I come from Latin America and I represent the region of Latin America and Caribbean countries in the Green Climate Fund. My region has 8.1% of the world population, more than 25 million people infected by COVID, and along the studies of ECLAC, 26 million jobs were lost in the region during the pandemic. Then my region has suffered its highest drop in gross domestic products. Then the worst hit region in the emerging world is Latin America and the Caribbean. What about GCF? In what concerns to GCF, it is intended to be the central instrument in efforts to raise climate change to $100 billion annually by 2020, the main amount in our story dedicated to this common goal. We have to consider that the main instrument is the GCF, and the amount engaged by the Paris Agreement and the Framework Convention on Climate Change is $100 billion. This equation has a reflex. In what concerns to this fund, within the framework of the United Nations Framework Convention, establish a mechanism to help developing countries in practical adaptation to climate change and mitigation effects. The deeds show the facts that the GCF Green Climate Fund has involved local communities formulating adaptation projects and has incorporated consumer production into plans for off-grid solar power. That's an example. Also works about mitigation, resilience, is carrying out a path to support developing countries climate-proof to develop the fight against climate change, which is useful and serves the purpose pursued by this conference. Because information is global, maybe formulation of measures are global, but transformation is absolutely local, as the human conscience. It is GCF training now designated national authorities to present projects to help shape them properly, also for productive commercial purposes that face climate change, decarbonization, fight against climate change, working actively to a sustainable recovery and reduce the global warming, and of the ministries and institutions of the countries that work with the development of productive communities of goods and products destined for internal and international trade. The most efficient way is the availability of more funds to specify more projects widely. I have to mention, because we have to touch the reality, to know the situation, that, for instance, a year ago, Côte d'Ivoire received a grant from GCF of $11.8 million with the support of FAO. This grant was for inclusive rural growth strategies, specially suited to the purpose proposed by this conference to encourage trade and sustainability. It is to remark that a third of the deforestation cost on the planet by anthropic reasons has its motivation in cocoa, we say cacao. These projects develop production and exchange practices that sustain the forest, fighting against the loss of forest mass and reducing emissions. It is exactly the contrary, the opposite way, because traditionally it was to do clear space with no more forest. This is an example of the work that is already being carried out by GCF, helping to improve access to fair trade markets, reducing the loss of forest cover with 600,000 small producers, adopting sustainable, productive and commercial practices. The training on the setting up of projects will facilitate the realization of a sustainable production and a sustainable and inclusive trade. From Argentina, we are also grateful to the Green Climate Fund, because last year we received the approval of our REDE Plus payment-based research about native forest that permit us to put into implementation, into practice, our national rule of native forest, which is also productive forest. The plan is for 6 years, and it is with special inclusion of women, young people, native people, indigenous one, and communities that are very far in our territory with 23rd federal states. In what concerns to the UNCTAD, I have a reflection. It is being, to us, carried out, and the way to promote this drive is to increase efforts for such training of the countries. I remember UNCTAD because it's fine for me to mention that I am a lawyer of Argentina and also a PhD of Los Angeles, and my thesis was about UNCTAD, sustainability, finance and trade, about the pillar of Prevish thesis. The answer about UNCTAD is based on the concept that UNCTAD is the international organization that is best able to promote sustainable trade. How? Assisting developing countries to face the development of trade policies, increasing of their market capacity from the growth of its sustainable production. We are our story. Before 2001 Doha Ministerial Declaration and the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation adopted by the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002, UNCTAD has built its important role in the concrete impulse to sustainable trade, in benefit of what trade could play in achieving development, sustainability, and poverty reduction. I have a suggestion, is to take into consideration that this is the momentum for UNCTAD to progress in the promotion of the access to markets and business opportunity for goods and services environmentally preferable and sustainable from developing countries, to promote the protection and sustainable use of the diversity, biological and traditional knowledge, to encourage effective application of SET's integrated facility measures. UNCTAD has the role, and I believe firmly on that, to convince about the need that especially trade measures has to prevent the establishment of new barriers that could be based on environmental aspects linked to climate change. To sustain that common but differentiated responsibilities is not a lax definition, but a very concrete one, and they register the barriers, the obstacles to trade that harm market access to the production of developing countries, harm the possibilities of developing countries to fight against climate, and then change through sustainable production and sustainable trade. How to work? I think that this is the moment to assist through training and field work in the field of sustainable marketing development, like the example of the Puna and the Côte d'Ivoire. Only two examples, but we can add many in the story of UNCTAD that results, that give success, linked to renewable energy supply to production, transportation, and the daily use of internal, national, and regional markets, and especially its projection to the international market. But we have this year just a very examination, what is the 12th Ministerial Conference of World Trade Organization. And also UNCTAD has to work with that, because the 12th Ministerial World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference has the opportunity to boost trade in environmental conditions on the basis of these common but differentiated responsibilities, get over the tariff and tariff obstacles that affect the developing countries, which today are the guardians of environmentally sustainable production through ancestral knowledge, productivity with an essentially genuine environment, with care for the environment through water, forest, species. All this is the very life of developing countries. Therefore, the best treatment must be guaranteed for the benefit of the development of their trade and exports, without obstacles that lead to a situation of further recession. For instance, the panel on structured discussion on trade and environmental sustainability with more than 50 countries has expressed it. Then it is essential that COP26 could success in achieve the realization of the commitment made in Paris Agreement and in the negotiation of UNFCCC, in particular, $100 billion per year to develop advance in the fight against the climate change, to build capacities and to concretize the technology transference. Also, I suggest that the progress has to involve financial conditions for developing countries in terms of concessionality, grants, treatment of debt. More than ever today, debt, finance, sustainable productive development, sustainable trade for the assurance of human rights must have a human face. It is no longer time for equations, but rather to correspond to the reality that demands a change of consciousness and collective change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sotillo, for sharing us concrete experiences, not only from the Latin America perspective, but also the mention to Côte d'Ivoire. I think that was very interesting. And thank you also for the encouragement regarding UNCTAD's role and contribution, of course, with the upcoming UNCTAD 15 ministerial, COP26, and of course, WTO ministerial. We are very encouraged to well, work together in a better way also. But now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sonam Wangdi, Chair of the Least Developed Countries Group on Climate Change and Secretary of the National Environment Commission of Kingdom of Bhutan, asking him to answer the following questions, taking into consideration the links between climate change and trade. How can trade support climate actions in least developed countries on the basis of your experience, of course? And how can international organizations, namely UNCTAD, better assist LDCs to face this challenge? You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just share the screen first. Chair, fellow panelists, excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to speak at this UN Trade Forum in terms of the plight of the LDCs and how trade and the international agencies could better support LDCs meet the challenge. Let me start by introducing ourselves, setting the context in terms of the LDCs and climate change. The LDCs, we are 46 countries, we have 1 billion people, we are spread across the world from the Caribbean towards Australia. We have 34 of our constituents in Africa and the rest in Asia Pacific and the Caribbean. And we, in fact, consider ourselves to have been least responsible to cause this climate crisis. The LDCs per se, we emit less than 1% of the global CO2 emissions. And it's if you do per capita, it is 0.31 tons of CO2 per year, as against average of more than 10 tons for someone from a high income country. We are at the front line of the climate crisis. We suffer the most and the hardest, even at 1 degree warming. We've been devastated. We are suffering every day. You hear about cyclones, floods, which are destroying properties, public infrastructure, lives and livelihoods. We, in fact, did a survey and found out that in the last 50 years, only 18% of the disasters occurred in the LDCs, but 69% of the casualties were in the LDCs. So because of this, we are worse affected by climate change, and we are trapped in this vicious cycle of poverty. Now, in terms of the situation we are in terms of climate change, we are, in fact, if we go in accordance with the current NDCs, we are heading towards almost 3 degrees, 2.9 degrees. This climate analytics tracker shows that there is some hope, though. One of the panelists mentioned, or there's an opportunity. Even the recent summit organized, leader summit by President Biden, the commitments made there, if you look at the extreme left, if you look at that, it's taking us towards about 2.5 degree rise. And with all these, if it comes, there's some 73% of the countries who have committed to net zero by 2050, we are coming towards 2 degrees. So that is quite optimistic. But we don't know, because if you look at the IPCC's 1.5 degree predictions, we are to reduce more than half in the next 10 years. We have to close this emission gap in the next 10 years, and we need to reduce something like almost 7.6%. Now, in terms of the LDCs, we've not been sitting. I mean, we are poor, we lack capacity, but we've been a progressive group in the climate negotiations and have taken leadership in terms of driving the momentum for climate ambition and action. We were the ones who also pushed for the 1.5 degree goal, and we have supported this 1.5 degree special report by IPCC, and we have called all the countries to, in fact, be on that 1.5 degree pathway. We have always raised that we need to close this emission gap. We ourselves launched our vision during the UN Secretary General Summit in 2019 to be on climate resilient development pathways by 2030 and deliver net zero by 2050 so that our societies and ecosystems thrive. We have also developed initiatives, adaptation, we call it Life AR, in terms of we taking the lead and asking donors to jointly tackle this issue of adaptation. We've also launched what we call a renewable energy initiative, where again, it's trying to bring clean energy, and what we call LUC. It is LDC University's consortium on climate change, mainly to enhance capacity building within the LDCs. We have also hosted the Thimphu Climate Ambition Summit last year for this momentum, to drive momentum for this 1.5 degree world. We have always, again, maintained that we need to scale up climate finance. There is not enough. The OECD 2018 report says that altogether, we didn't reach 100 billion. We were somewhere near 78 billion. And Oxfam says that true climate finance is closer to just about 22 billion. And only 14% goes to the LDCs. Also, loss and damage is a huge issue for the LDCs, especially when you are affected by these disasters. And of course, access to finance is also an issue which my other panelists have also raised. Now, in terms of the nexus or the linkage between climate and trade, and in terms of what can trade do for the climate regime, and what can also the supranational agencies do for this agenda. So I have, in fact, I worked in the trade and industries domain for about 3 decades. And now I'm in the climate sector, and I've been working almost 3 years. And when I was asked to make this presentation, I asked my advisors in the climate area, and none of them were able to make me the talking points. So this got me thinking, and purposely I have designed it in this way, that there is, in fact, there is this huge need. I'm going to be laying out in terms of the process before even getting to the substantive matter. And I think that is very important. I believe we say in every agency as if we know it and we are contributing, but sorry to say, I don't think it is true that others don't understand it, and it doesn't go anywhere. I think that is very important. That is why I'm saying collaboration, cooperation, coordination. I believe that is key. We need to connect all involved parties, supranational agencies. Here we are talking about UNFCCC, UNEP, WTO, UNCTAD, ITC, OECD, all those that are involved, including parties, NGOs, businesses, farmers, And later I will tell you why. And we need to involve them. And in any of these processes, I believe it has to be transparent, inclusive, and environmental justice must be delivered. And we know that what are the options? Everybody knows that appropriate policy options, it would be, and it has to be incentivized or disincentivized through taxes. But in this domain, I believe even technology plays, a cleaner technology, it does. The green recovery we are talking about, I believe is very important. And financing. Without financing, today I had an interview with BBC and they were telling me what will happen if the finance does not come. I told them that 2020 was the important year, but because of COVID, it shifted to 2021. If the finance doesn't come, we can't have the climate actions on the ground. We are stuck. That is what it means. So we need, in fact, everything must be directed towards environmental outcomes. Because many of these, even if we talk SDG, many of there is, in fact, it's mixed. You put in the labor, you put in human rights, and somehow you actually, you put in poverty, you don't get that pure environment. Now, if you look at potential areas of collaboration, some of our panelists have already touched some of these areas. I believe that that a new framework is needed for traded and consumption emissions. The current climate regime's territorial emission, I believe it does not truly reflect the carbon footprint nor the reductions, because today the traded emissions account for almost 38%. It's a huge area, and it's a huge amount, and we actually cannot tell where the true carbon footprint. And because of this, nowadays we've heard of carbon border adjustment. We've heard about green deals in trade agreements. But these issues are, as far as we are concerned, there is this, what I have talked about, collaboration, cooperation, coordination has not happened here. These are happening in isolation by blocks. Mostly carbon border adjustment is EU business. There's no consultation. We don't know. We don't know whether it's going to be good for us or it's going to be bad for us. We don't. Likewise, in terms of standard certification, these are about measurement, reporting, certification of the carbon footprint. And a lot of work has been done. I went and browsed, I was trying to look for that, and I found that the British think tank ODI, they have a lot of literature on these. But of course, these are all, again, things like a lot of work done. There's this Greenhouse Gas Protocol Initiative. Then we have the International Organization for Standards and Carbon Disclosure Project, Science-Based Targets Initiative. These are World Resource Institute. Carbon Neutral Protocol. We have Evico's Smart Sustainability Certification. We have Carbon Trust, carbon labeling. So we have all these, again, a lot of these standards and certifications. All these are, again, it's happening in silos. It's not the principles I laid out has not happened. It is not inclusive. We have not been consulted. And once these are put into practice, I believe the LDCs are going to suffer the green squeeze. It's going to be very expensive for us. Even farmers asked to meet certain standards. It's going to be very difficult, the certification process. So I believe that all these, it is very important that this is where everybody who is involved should come together, and it's working towards a common goal where we can then have this buy-in with everyone on board, and it should then help us to, in fact, save this planet. Now, in terms of, again, some of the panelists have also mentioned where we don't need agreement, where there is no standard, which every country can do. It is, I believe it's in the area of sustainable production and consumption. Closely, I think there's a SDG goal, responsible consumption and production, SDG 12. But here we are trying to incentivize reducing carbon intensity of production and raw materials. And this, again, circular economic concept was mentioned. I think that is very important. Every country can do this. I think more work needs to be done on that front, where we can reuse, extend the life of the products, and ensure that that in terms of the waste, at least going towards almost a zero waste concept. So we are not very resource intensive. We are able to then reuse and recycle whatever we have. So we are light on the resource. I believe this one does not need any agreement among countries or a convention, or here everyone can do. And also the last one, I believe, is one. This in Bhutan, we have citizen stewardship of the environment. And this is, I believe, we need to create that awareness that each and every one of us is rather duty bound to protect. Because even in terms of the rise in traded emissions, they tried to look at why it was happening. And everyone thought it was because of deindustrialization. It was not the case. It was because people were wealthier, had more capacity, more disposable income. So here now the duty falls on each and every one of the citizens to protect, to consume less, so that you contribute to the environmental, rather carbon abatement. So from my side, I think this is all I have to say, and I have also made my presentation quite simple, but I am stressing that we need to be very careful what we are saying, what we are declaring. Unless everybody's on board, no matter which agency is declaring which scheme, it has no meaning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wangdi, first of all, for highlighting the special challenges faced by the LDC countries, and, well, in any case, highlighting the need for collaboration, cooperation, and coordination. I think those are very important messages, as well as the need for technology and financing. So we reach our final speaker, Ms. Pamela Koch-Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Pamela, considering ITC's experience and your own previous experience in the Caribbean, how can developing country exporters adapt to new market realities? And how can international organizations such as UNCTAD and ITC, obviously in cooperation, better support developing countries to face this challenge? You have the floor.
Thanks very much, Teresa. Very good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me. I also want to extend my gratitude to the colleagues at UNCTAD for inviting me to join you for this important and timely discussion, and also to my fellow panelists for your insightful perspectives. It's always hard to come last, but I'll try to make sure that what I say actually adds to the dialogue. In essence, the changing demands in international markets and new regulations are making a green shift of small business no longer an option, but a requirement. It's a must. We see that producers in developing countries are facing requirements from different angles, from their buyers requiring compliance, from consumers demanding sustainable products, from policymakers steering their countries' contributions towards the Paris Agreement, as well as demanding value chain due diligence, etc. So these changes can be challenging for small producers. And I actually want to use a terminology that I just heard, and I like it, from the chair of the LDCs, which is the green squeeze. It's actually a reality, not just for LDCs, but it will be a reality to some extent for MSMEs. So MSMEs in developing countries often are unaware of or lack the capacity to comply with private requirements in value chains or voluntary sustainability standards, which are increasingly making their way into due diligence legislation. Additionally, uncertainty at the intersection of trade and environmental policy make it difficult for MSMEs to adapt and make business work. From the EU Green Deal to the French and German supply chains laws, we see that market access requirements could change, directly impacting on producers for developing countries. So beyond the high costs associated with compliance and non-compliance with the legal initiatives, Greening business operations require additional financial and human capital resources of SMEs, which are already resource constrained. SMEs require technical and managerial skills and an understanding of new technologies, processes, and of how to trade in the new markets. COVID-19 has added complexity to this picture for small businesses. IDC's SME Competitiveness Outlook for 2021, which will be launched for MSME Day this month, has highlighted how this crisis unveiled a resilience divide between smaller and larger firms. Micro and smaller businesses have significantly lower resilience scores than medium and large-sized firms. And this matters since resilient companies were 5 times less likely to lay off employees and more likely to have stable sales during the pandemic. The COVID-19 crisis has taught us that if we want MSMEs to survive and thrive through the green transition, we need to invest in the fundamentals for their resilience. At the same time, adopting sustainable practices is not only about businesses being good, it's also about making good business. Not only by complying with emerging climate regulations, MSMEs can increase their reputation and access to international value chains more easily. But also, the green transition paves the way for green entrepreneurship and sustainable financing, tapping into sectors in which they're well placed to compete, like the trade of nature-based products that we are pursuing. Moreover, climate resilience and good management of environmental risks reduce the possibility of MSMEs experiencing shocks, leading to more robust businesses and income security for the related communities. Finally, more sustainable production processes also mean increased efficiency, thereby reducing costs for MSMEs. Besides process efficiency, MSMEs realize cost reductions through product design, waste disposal, switching from raw materials to recycled ones, packaging and transport, as many different ITC projects have shown. On the second question, how do international organizations like UNCTAD and ITC better collaborate? I believe international organizations need to start with mainstreaming environmental sustainability into their development plans, as well as into aid for trade programming, from needs assessment all the way to implementation. Coordination with other organizations and seeking complementarity of actions both locally and internationally is the approach we need to adopt. There are promising initiatives in the UN system helping to move away from a silos approach. For example, the Environment Management Group called for a multi-agency effort for coordinated action for green recovery, to which ITC, WHO, ILO, UNEP, UNFCCC, among others, are contributing. At the country level, coordination via local RC offices is also crucial. Through ITC's Green to Compete strategy, ITC is fully committed to contributing to this coordination. We know that through this, we can best support MSMEs seize the opportunities of the green transition. For example, in a project that's very close to home for me, the Alliances for Coconut Industry Development in the Caribbean. We're building alliances to foster collaboration among many local and international partners. The project supports entrepreneurs in Barbados to extract value from coconut waste originating from the production of coconut products. By using bioreactor technology, the project is piloting the transformation of coconut husks into biogas and digestate mulch for consumption at local farms. In this way, the project responds to a serious health and waste management issue affecting the island, while also supporting local green growth. In addition, there are several ways in which international agencies such as ITC and UNCTAD can support MSMEs to go green. One is to improve the knowledge base of climate and environmental implications for value chains and MSMEs, offering a platform for information and best practices. At IDC, for example, with the Pakistan Grass Project, we collect MSME level data to quantify the impact of environmental hazards and to map good practices of resources use and efficiency. Through this, we design forward-looking adaptation strategies while also mapping opportunities offered by green markets. Secondly, international organizations should also support local business support organizations to enhance their portfolio of services for MSMEs to go green. For example, through the Green to Compete hubs that we have established, we're working with BSOs such as Caribbean Export as one-stop shops for the sustainability of MSMEs. Using ITC tools, BSOs provide services to MSMEs to become more climate resilient, move towards circular production models, and position themselves on sustainable product markets. Finally, to drive systemic change, more action to align trade and environmental policies required. These policies need to be aligned with the priorities of developing countries so they can thrive in a green economy. At ITC, we're supporting developing countries to participate in negotiations and dialogue in relation to the WTO, not the least in support of the structured discussions in the lead up to the 2021 Ministerial Conference, MC12, with the aim to make their voice heard in the policies that will shape the transition to a green economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for, well, first of all, for sharing the experience and the special needs of SMEs and MSMEs, and also, sharing concrete ideas of tools and instruments on how together we can better assist, developing countries, exporters and producers to face these challenges. With this, we get to the end of the speakers' interventions, and I would now like to open the floor for the questions from the audience. And we have received one question so far that I would like to share with all speakers. And I would propose, Pamela, to start with you, so inverting the order. It's quite a broader question that I will try to share with you. So this question focus on the importance of new technologies, such as for electric cars in reducing pollution, and the importance of making these technologies more accessible in all countries across the world. So I would like to invite panelists to share their views on what needs to be done from your perspective to facilitate the diffusion of technological advances, so that these can have a larger impact in contributing to the green recovery and reducing the climate change crisis. Pamela, I would start with you, if that is okay. So inverting the order. Thank you.
No problem. This is one very close to my heart because I drove an electric car in Barbados for 4 years. I was one of the first ones to buy one and get one because I thought it was that important. But interestingly, one of the major barriers was the fact that the taxes that were imposed, or it was agreed that the taxes would have been lower. Unfortunately, what happened is that once it began to increase as a product that was being imported, it then became a revenue earner. And therefore, taxes were then increased from what the original idea was, which was that this was supposed to improve environmental sustainability and lower, carbon emissions. Over the years, this has changed, luckily, so they've lowered the duties, but it continues to be a barrier, a huge barrier to persons buying it, because if it is not more competitive than the fossil fuel driven cars, then persons wonder, well, why should they bother? And so that's one area. The second area is to increase the capacity to service these vehicles and to ensure that they are fit for purpose and can continue. Because if you don't have the technology to continue to service them, then it can be a difficulty. The third issue is, to what extent can those be manufactured in the developing world? Because so much of the input that comes into making the electric vehicle, comes from, as we know, cobalt, among others, comes from the developing countries. So wouldn't that be important to try to facilitate the actual creation of these, where the actual inputs come from? So I'll stop there.
It was a very good start. So I would move to Mr. Wangdi. Would you like to share your views with us on how to facilitate the diffusion of technological advances?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I believe the secret is that technology transfer, development and transfer must be there from the developed world to the developing. It's very important. We have to get beyond these patents. The electric car in particular, I believe that since it is still quite new, it is still very expensive. For example, in Bhutan, we don't have any taxes on electric cars, but it's been, since we started the initiative about 7-8 years ago, it has not really taken off. One, it is still very expensive. The car per se is expensive. Two, you need this infrastructure in the country, charging stations. And that is, in fact, for a country like Bhutan, we are, though we have a small population, but we are 38,000 square kilometers, challenging terrain and trying to have, so it is quite a challenge. And I believe governments are trying, but unless there's a dramatic shift in the market per se, so that there is a change, this is between fossil to electric, unless that dramatic change occurs in terms of having, whether we are polluter pay principle, we are really charging more on the fossil fuel, carbon tax, and even on the cars that are, let's say, fully fossil fuel, where the charges could be high, very, very high. Till I think really there has to be a shift, total shift, and that has not occurred. So till that occurs, I believe it's going to take some time. Thank you.
Very much. Dr. Sotillo, would you like to share your views on this, please?
This is an important question. If we can imagine Mexico, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo with electric cars, with new cars moved by new energies, the life will be different. One problem is tax. Tax are something that has to be considered for World Trade Organization Conference of Ministers 12. And the possibilities of sustainable car can be made by the countries. For instance, many universities of Latin America and Caribbean, I can mention National University of Technological, National University of Cordoba, or Jujuy, where it is especially developed the trial of new energies and the success of transformation. But what is about? It is a budget that has to be considered in the fight against climate change. For instance, Paris Agreement and the framework Convention of United Nations Climate Change have a consideration and an engagement of $100 billion per year. Transfer of technology to fight against this phenomenon of warming is also of the essence of the implementation of Paris Agreement. Then it's not only the need of trade measures, also the possibility of development made into the countries, but also to accomplish the cornerstone of Paris Agreement. Thank you.
I am afraid that Ambassador Blackman had to leave us to join a very urgent meeting of the International Labour Organization, but he remained available to answer any questions at a later stage. So with this, I would give the floor to Secretary General Patricia Scotland. Could you share with us your views on how to promote an easier and probably less expensive transfer of technology?
I think I would really advocate that we work even more energetically on sharing knowledge, technology, and expertise. Everything that's been said by my colleagues is correct, but you know that we've already been working on our connectivity agenda and working on the sustainable energy transition agenda, because for so many of our countries, if we don't have sustainable energy, then even using electric cars isn't going to be an option for many because of the cost of electricity. So I think there's also a need for us to look at other sustainable natural ways of developing methodologies which are cheaper, faster, and easier. So this coming together is what is critically important, and to create open source understanding and frameworks which we can share. So if I may say so, therefore, the work that we are doing as multilateral agencies to come together, to crystallize what works, to crystallize what doesn't work, to make it cheaper, easier, faster, and more transferable, we have to put a boost in that work. Because if we don't want to have the unfairness that we have now, we have to bridge that gap. And some of the things we're looking at in the Secretariat is how we can create those frameworks and opportunities. And Pamela spoke also about legislation and tax. One of the other issues we're looking at is, how do you get a fair system? What does that look like? How do we take advantage of the circular economy so that we take out waste and we put in more place-based, nature-based solutions which make a difference? So it's doing this not in isolation, but seeing it as part of a whole, which I think will make a real difference. But sharing that knowledge and data is pivotal, and making sure it's open and accessible for the least advantaged, the smallest, and the most vulnerable. And we can do that if we choose. And I think we are doing it, and we need to turbo boost it.
Much for that strong message also. I think it's extremely important, and it really came out from all the interventions, that this need of course, working also, it's building forward better, but in a more collaborative way, of course, with also probably more suitable instruments, since all the speakers mentioned the need for access to finance, the need for transfer of technology, but also the need for new frameworks or new vehicles, new avenues to really effectively tackle the challenges that the climate crisis and a green transition encompass.
I mean, if I may say so, you know, human genius has got us into this mess. And human genius is going to get us out again if we share that genius and really transform and let innovation be our future tool, which creates opportunity and fairness for everybody.
I think this is very inspiring. Allow me also just to say that already tomorrow we will be discussing in session 2 of the UN Trade Forum how well the green transition can also lead to a more inclusive society. And I think several of the references of today's speakers are very much pointing that way. We have another question that I'm afraid I won't have time to really address, but I wanted just to explain that because we had a number of very eminent speakers, we did not have much more time. In any case, the question relates to the green transition in Africa. And I wanted just to highlight that this morning in the high-level panel, we did have a commissioner from the African Union organization who actually spoke very eloquently of the role of infrastructures and so other key features for a green and inclusive economic recovery. And we also heard the Portuguese Minister of Foreign Affairs speaking on behalf of the EU presidency and mentioning the EU-Africa recent summit, where of course this issue and the means and instruments to support African countries also to engage in a green and inclusive recovery were addressed. I think we are very close to the end. I would like just to ask our panelists if they wanted to give us a final statement of 1-2 minutes to wrap up this first session. I will hand over to you, Secretary Scotland. Just your final thoughts for us to wrap up the session of today, please.
Well, all right. As I said, we need human genius. And this means we need to integrate, I think, the climate change into the work program of every organization that deals with economic and social policies, and ensure that governments and other stakeholders are empowered to combat the challenges posed by climate change. Everybody's been saying that today. And the well-being of humankind depends on the well-being of our planet. So nature is the source of our health and prosperity, and we must collaborate to protect and preserve it. So a key policy objective of greener recovery efforts should be to reduce inequalities and bridge those digital divides. The pandemic has widened the existing inequalities between leaders and followers, and the asymmetric vaccination drive and uneven pace of recovery is expanding this gap further. So greener trade policies should help to bridge the digital and the economic divides, not broaden them further. So measures that we've been speaking about to tackle climate change should be fair, justified, transparent, and not result in new protectionism. For example, we've spoken about the border carbon adjustment mechanisms to tackle climate change that should be subject to WTO rules and procedures. And these measures could also have significant implications for international trade and present smaller developing countries with a new set of challenges. And they may also affect the investment landscape and require developing countries to design more integrated climate change investment plans. So I too liked this concept, which I'm going to hold on to, of green squeeze. We've got to make sure that that green squeeze applies to everybody or no one at all.
I think it was actually a very interesting and very catchy expression that, well, is very almost graphic, but very much illustrates how challenges are not also equally distributed by all. And on this note, I would like also to ask Dr. Sotillo to share with us her final statements, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, the suggestion of the expansion of this event, of this idea, if it can be shared for the countries and incorporate new suggestions, it will be strong for the end. Then I know that the only change in this situation of humanity is consciousness change. For that, every leaders' summit has to move us in this way. Multilateral agreements on the environment has to contribute to sustainable development of production and trade, especially in developing countries, as an efficient way to deal with the planet environmental problems. Then we have to take into consideration the first place of trade and environment related issues to be addressed with the framework of a broad sustainable development agenda. It requires increasing attention be paid to development issues of critical interest to developing countries, such as access to markets, business opportunity for environmentally preferable goods and services, the protection and sustainable use of biological diversity and of traditional knowledge, and the effective implementation of integrated packages of facilitation measures, and, if necessary, trade measures of multilateral environmental agreement to address in order to reduce barrier obstacles from tariff and trade and obstacles that are technical, so to permit the development of a sustainable trade. Finally, I have a message for UNCTAD. UNCTAD experience is decisive, more than other international organizations, to convey the message about the objective, to achieve commercial trade policies that respond to our common imperative of environmental sustainability of trade, so to guarantee the essential human right to a healthy environment, founded also on sustainable trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sotillo. Also very good messages and good suggestions for UNCTAD. And now I would hand the floor to Mr. Wangdi for his final remarks. Please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I believe we have a climate emergency, and now is the time for all to get together. We were talking about the the trade elements in climate policy. And so now there is a need for everyone to come together, whether we have to develop a new regime for that, or the standards and the certification that I talked about. I believe it should be participatory. Everyone must come together. It has to have this buy-in, and it has to deliver, again, that environmental justice for all, whether it is incentives or disincentives. And now is the time. I believe there is no better time than now. Now is the time that even we are looking at Glasgow to be the turning point of this is one of the, we sometimes say this is the last chance that we have to save this planet. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Wangdi. Finally, Pamela, again, the final word.
Thanks so much, Teresa. I really have appreciated. I think one of the key elements is that, you know, sustainable greening and social inclusion must go hand in hand, as Secretary General Baroness Scotland so clearly said, that it's critical because one cannot be successful without the other. And there will be opportunities in the green transition for SMEs in developing countries. So we need to ensure that they can actually seize on them. We have embarked on a strengthening different business ecosystems of developing countries. And this has a key role in building conducive business environments to effectively support MSMEs. The first one is local policymakers need to ensure regulatory and policy coherence among the domestic development policies, environmental management, and trade policy. In other words, there needs to be coherence in the countries and adopt a facilitated policy instrument for the green transition, from fiscal policies, incentivizing green MSMEs, IP laws that reward innovation, to strong integration among domestic and regional markets. We will likely observe a reconfiguration of value chains with production centers being more closely located at the consumption point as a result of COVID-19. Second, governments need to work closely with bankers and financiers, particularly microfinance institutions and impact investors, to guarantee access to finance to green MSMEs who usually struggle to access credit from commercial banks. This often requires long-term, financing for investment with very uncertain returns. So MSMEs need to be supported with innovative tools such as seed funding and impact investing instruments. Finally, skills are a key determinant for the development of green MSMEs. Access to the skills necessary to apply the green technologies, along with basic entrepreneurial education, is very scarce. So it's crucial to gear up firms and educational institutions such as universities, TVET institutions, accelerators, and incubators of business ideas to upgrade industry skill sets. For the green transition to be just, it's also equally important to retrain and realign skills in sectors that will decline as a result of it. So I'll stop there, but we believe that it's important that it be an equal and level playing field for all. Thank you.
Very much, Pamela. Well, several very good suggestions from not only for policymakers, as you mentioned, as well as for businesses, but I think you touched upon also very relevant issues covering skills, regulatory frameworks, and of course, public policy instruments that are adjusted to the financing, to the transfer of technology that was mentioned. Well, I would like to say that this has been a very interesting discussion that we need to close. I would ask my eminent panelists to put their cameras on for a group photo of this session, thanking them very, very much for this discussion. It was a privilege for me to moderate the session and to be interacting with you. As you know, this session also will lead to UNCTAD's work within the framework of the ministerial conference UNCTAD 15. So definitely the UN Trade Forum second edition will also build up to our discussions in UNCTAD 15, well, especially on such a timely and relevant topic. And I would like also, before I close, to remind all the participants that tomorrow we have the second session of the UN Trade Forum that will as I mentioned before, focus more on the inclusiveness aspect that was frequently addressed by so many of the speakers today. So maybe we could now have the group photo. Are we all ready? Excuse me, we just need one more second, apparently. Are we good?
Thank you, Teresa.
Okay, Pierre, can we do it?
Yes, one more, maybe smiling. Yes, thank you. 1, 2, 3, shuck. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our speakers, to our participants.
Thank you.
Stay
Bye-bye.
tuned for the second session of the UN Trade Forum. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Muchas gracias.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Goodbye. Nice meeting you.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.